You're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam. Streaming on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and at DCAUreview.com. Now, here's today's episode.
Welcome to episode 90 of the DCAU Review. I am your host, Cal, and with me, my good brother and good friend, and the man who runs the DCAU Review Twitter page. That's right, it's Liam. Liam, we made it to episode 90 here, and we are finishing out the month of January, and the month of Batman Beyond.
Yeah, we're already a month into the new year. Got some exciting stuff on the horizon, which we can talk about at the end of the show. But yeah, before we get there, we have one last interesting episode of Batman Beyond to chat about.
Yeah, so it's the Return of Spellbinder. We are reviewing the second Spellbinder episode, which is entitled Hooked Up. And this is was originally aired back on November 13th, 1999, just past the 20-year anniversary of that program. This one, of course, the meaning or the title of the episode has a couple of different meanings to it. Liam, we discussed before we went on the air here that this is the third episode in the Batman Beyond lore that deals with teenagers being addicted to things. It was a popular trope that they went back to several times. I guess before we jump into our thoughts on that plot, let us get the official IMDb synopsis in your best announcer voice, please.
But of course, and this is for the episode Hooked Up, as you mentioned, which was written by Bob Goodman and directed by Dan Reba. And that synopsis reads as such. Batman investigates a ring of troubled kids who are so addicted to a powerful virtual reality fantasy that they will do anything to continue it.
There we go. Okay. That is what happens. There's more to it, of course, as it's just a synopsis. Now, we learn very quickly in this episode that Spellbinder is the villain. He's revealed probably within the first 30 seconds, which isn't okay. No secret that he was back. They don't really explain how he escaped prison, how he got out. Or how he came to obtain these 4 or 5 VR machines that are also available in the most popular arcade in the city, apparently. Does it say, is he the one who designed, he's not credited with designing them?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, I imagine that his are tweaked a little from whatever the model is that's in the arcades, but yeah, they don't really specify that beyond that they're just, he does something to them that makes them more addictive than, I guess, your average video game.
Yeah, so there is a character that we're introduced to who we've never seen before, Donnie, who we learn is a runaway who goes to Hamilton Hill High. Terry recognizes him as he's out doing patrols. And we were actually introduced to him in the very first scene, and we can see that he is addicted to this machine that lets him live out his fantasy as a rock star, as it were, I guess. I don't know.
He's doing slam poetry, though. He's not even doing he's not even singing. He's doing
I wish I'd written
slam poetry.
The lyrics are just absolutely amazing. Go out of your way to please check out his performance. Maybe we'll post it on Twitter this week. But it's quite interesting. So we learned very quickly that Donnie is so addicted that he is willing to go out and steal for the opportunity to come back and use. The parallels here are very clear. It's very similar to. I guess similar to the splicing and the Winning Edge episode, in that these kids it's a substitute for drugs. Clearly, I mean that's what it's about. This is a not so subtle way of. I think they had a mandate that they were not allowed to use drugs, discuss drugs, stuff like that on the air. So they decided they were going to do a drug addiction episode by working this in. Let's hear your thoughts. What are your thoughts on this episode, and then I'll sprinkle in my thoughts as we go.
Well, yeah, obviously, as you mentioned, there's obviously a very thinly veiled addiction message here, and how even sort of the good kids at school, like Max, can get addicted to it. And I do think that sort of with Modern Eyes, this has a little bit more punch to it than the Splicers episode or the Slappers episode did.
Sure.
Just because it's very much a modern and real life problem that, despite the fact that we've never had more technology or more ability to theoretically be connected to the world at large, isolation is still a big problem. People were retreating away from the real world and into a virtual world. Now it's not, whatever they called it, sensory deprivation VR or whatever, but it's, the digital world leads to a lot of very isolated people and creates a lot of, social and social problems in the world today. So I do think there's like something that this actually, I think, works better with modern sensibilities to it. That being said, it's sort of wrapped up in your average, cartoon PSA, kids stealing from their parents or whatever to get the next fix, and Batman kind of sternly being there to kind of set them right. But I do think they tried to at least show that, like, for a lot of these people, the real world isn't a fun place. It's a mean and sad place, and they just want to do anything to get away from it. So, like I said, I think with that modern sensibility, this one does have a little more punch to it than some of the other ones that we've done on similar topics so far. But it's still a little bit over the top and hammy. And again, maybe it's because it's, a virtual reality machine is the stand-in for it. But I like there's something good in there, I think, about the idea of not necessarily looking at, video games are just as bad as heroin or something, but they are making a point that, like, technology, despite all its great advantages, can in fact lead to us being even more isolated than we were in previous years, previous societies.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting, and I think when you look at it, especially that this came out in 1999, way before the advent of or several years before the advent of the smartphone and the Twitter and Facebook and everything revolution that happened hand in hand with that. It's a couple years before that. So the fact that they sort of pseudo predicted that this would become an issue where people would do whatever they could to use technology to escape. Yeah, that's really interesting. I think, though, that it was, if I had to guess, that they weren't writing to predict that was going to happen, more than they were just sort of substituting this for drugs because they're not allowed to talk about drugs.
Right.
And because of that, I feel like this episode wanted to do something or say something, but it doesn't. Like, you have the characters that are addicted to this. Well, the VR machine is the drug, and they go out and do whatever they have to do to get more of it, which is very well mirrored in drug addiction or alcohol addiction or a lot of addictions. Nothing else matters. That's the only thing that matters to you. You're going to do. It doesn't matter. A great example is where at the end where Max has the choice to pick between Terry helping Terry out from being killed by the Spellbinder or getting back in the VR machine. And it appears that she says, well, I'm just going to get back in the VR machine, but don't kill him. Like, she doesn't even, the appearance is that she doesn't care about it, which is a perfect euphemism, because ultimately an addict thinks about is their next fix. And that's the disease, part of the disease of addiction. But it doesn't really say anything because it doesn't go into what happens to these other kids that are addicted to this. They're kind of made the villains because they're addicted to it. They're out stealing things. And yeah, that's not good. But it's a symptom of the addiction that they have. The one girl, that the redhead that has this, that gets used up to the point where she's brain dead and, gets sent to the hospital. There's no resolution to what happens to her other than she goes into Bruce, she has a throwaway line about her going to the hospital. There's no talking about what happened.
Yeah, there's a little exposition from the news reporter at the end about how, well, now the doctors have seen how the machines work. They're gonna work they know better how to treat the people or something like that. It's like a really quick line, but you don't get any sort of direct resolution to that, or to the Donnie character there's a part where Terry and Max go to his home and he's very clearly in kind of this rundown, abusive, miserable home where his dad tells Terry and Max he doesn't ever want to see his son again. And we don't get any sort of there's no happy ending for most of these characters, to your point.
Right. And so I feel like it wants to say something and it doesn't. It just kind of glosses over it. And we've had a few instances in some of the episodes that we've reviewed that have dealt with some of the more serious tones, most of them occurring in Batman the Animated Series. And there have been ones that have touched on terrible things. Like we one of our most surprised episodes, It's Never Too Late, which you can hear in the archives at DCAUreview.com, deals also with drugs, but it deals with the drug trafficking side of things and the side that the dealers don't usually see, and that the dealer coming face to face with that covers something that was real and is done really, really well. There have been other episodes, like Dollar and the Bad Episode Jar, The Underdwellers, that dealt with child kidnapping and borderline forced child labor, and there was no sort of, or the Forgotten, where the homeless epidemic, and there was no sort of happy ending or nothing that was really said or done in those episodes. So I feel like this kind of falls into one of those as well. And it's interesting you mentioned, so it reminded me of having Max sort of dragged into this, reminded me of there's a famous series of comics from the Green Lantern, Green Arrow back in the late or the early 70s, actually, where Speedy, Roy Harper, actually gets addicted to heroin, and it's a sort of a watershed moment in DC Comics and in comics history overall, because it's tackling such a serious issue. And the cover of it has Roy shooting heroin on it, that, and that is a legendary series of comics, and tackles that with such seriousness. So comparing, thinking about that, using that as sort of a reference point to this, where Max is sort of dragged into it, her resolution, and I get it's a 22-minute cartoon, the resolution to her story just seems way too easy and way too happy. She's, I'm going to, I'm going to decide I'm not going to do this anymore. Or maybe were they sort of inferring that she knew all along that she wasn't really addicted? I don't know. That ending is so ambiguous to me.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And to your point, even in the way that there's kind of a thing with Terry's really sort of I don't know if judgmental is the right word, but he's very forceful and angry with her when he finds her stealing credits from somebody's car, trying to get another fix with the machine. And again, that plays off in the comic when the Green Arrow sees Speedy he beats him. It's a really awful, violent moment where Green Arrow just is so filled with rage at the idea that this could happen, and that he's not thinking about addiction as an illness in that moment. Again, it could have, maybe that would have been too PSA, or maybe it's 20 years later and we maybe were a little bit better at talking about addiction and talking about addiction as an illness now as a society than we were in the late 90s. But either way, I think there's like, yeah, it's like I said, for some of the good stuff that they did and some of the stuff that does work better maybe in modern times, I think sort of the way it's sort of blanketly being like, yeah, addiction's bad but it's not like, right, we don't hear about, say, Bruce Wayne paying for all of these kids to go to rehab or something. We don't hear, there's not like a great resolution to all of it, to your point.
And even honestly, like as somebody, there have been close loved ones in our family that have been affected by addiction. Most people can probably know people that have been affected by addiction. Not every story has a happy ending. So I'm not even saying that there had to be a happy ending for Donnie. He gets to go home and his dad gives him a hug. Like, no, but the fact that the episode sort of ends on this Terry and Max walking away like, oh, well, we learned and you got to watch out. Don't get into too much trouble next time. Like, man, like it just sort of just glosses over the fact that I much rather there would have been sort of just like a sucky end to the story, like, and not such a like bow put on the end of it, like a harsh realization that these kids' lives could be ruined going forward, or there doesn't have to be a happy ending. It doesn't have to be Bruce Wayne driving away in the limousine, after giving a couple $1 million to the homeless shelter or whatever he did at the end of The Forgotten. Like, there can be just like, there's no happy ending. There's an episode we haven't covered yet, but in the new Batman Adventures with Clayface and Robin, where that episode ends on a real downer and it's done so well. It's like, not every story ends with a happy ending, and it doesn't have to, but to just sort of ignore it and push it aside, I don't know. I'll get to my score in just a second, but one other aspect of this plot that I wanted to touch on, just to get your thoughts on. So the flip side is that the whole point of Max getting involved with this is that Max is pushing to become deeply involved in the whole Batman operation. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's kind of interesting, and I think that's maybe some of the more, I don't know if fun is the right word, but Terry and Bruce's back and forth about how they're both kind of agreeing that they don't want her more involved, and then later when she does sort of force herself into it and does end up getting involved with the Spellbinder directly, Terry is really kind of blaming himself and really beating himself up, and Bruce, I think, has a great line where he says, now you sound like Batman, and tells him that, he's been in that same position with his allies over the years, and probably even with Terry himself in that case of, when someone else is suiting up to try to further your mission, and they're put in harm's way, you can't help but sort of feel guilty or feel responsible for it. And I do like that part of it, of her sort of wanting to be more involved and Terry sort of struggling with it. And obviously that's a plot point that's certainly expanded upon going forward. So I liked that as a first step towards that end.
That was the one thing that I found somewhat redeemable about that, for all the complaints that I had about this episode, was at least we get some more depth in Max. We get to learn a little bit about her story. She's not from the perfect family. She's from a broken home, and sort of overcome some stuff in her own life. So the fact that we get to flesh out that character a little bit is something of a redemption for this story. However, didn't reflect too much in the scores that I gave this episode, because of the issues that I had with it, and I just felt like it was trying to say something but wasn't willing to really stand on anything to say it. I gave plot 4 out of 10.
Wow. Yeah, I'm not too far off. I went 6 out of 10. I didn't have quite as big a problem with it as you. But yeah, I also don't disagree. Like I said, for all the reasons we've mentioned, that felt like it could have been better, that it could have been a little stronger. instead it just sort of lightly touches on a lot of these issues and then sort of throws a blanket over and says they're bad, and kind of moves on. Yeah,
but don't worry, Terry and Max and Bruce are okay.
Right. Yeah, and I also just didn't think the ending was very strong either. Like Max knocks out Spellbinder, and like we said, we get a little bit of exposition from the hologram news reporter, and Terry and Max sort of just walk off. But it just didn't feel like a super strong ending to the whole thing too. Maybe a little bit longer of a scene between them, sort of talking over everything or something would have made it stronger. But it's just sort of like, well, that's what happens. The end. And let's never speak of it again.
Exactly. All right, let's move on to our next category then, Liam. Let's talk about animation and visuals. I thought animation and visuals were pretty strong in this episode. You had certainly some fantasy scenarios that we got to see some, I guess, what a future rock concert would look like in theory, with like a 700-foot tall podium in a giant coliseum in that very opening scene. But you also got so one of, if not arguably the most toyetic of Batman Beyond's villains. He ranks right up there with Blight. So you have visually interesting character in Spellbinder making his second appearance here. Not as interesting of maybe scenarios as the first episode, where you had zombies and giant gross bug insects and all those other things that he brought in those scenarios. But he gives some opportunity there for some interesting visuals. You get to see the arcade, some more of Gotham. I was pleasantly surprised that this episode didn't take place more at Hamilton Hill High, because I felt like with that shift that we talked about a couple weeks ago, that it might be headed in that direction for this episode, but it didn't. What do you think of this week's episode's visuals and animation?
Yeah, I agree with most of what you're saying. I especially liked the like when we go to Max's apartment again. We talked about that probably all the way back when we reviewed the pilot episodes for Batman Beyond, about how this idea that they had, where sort of the upper city, the subway is an elevator, so up top you have the nice, sleek looking, futuristic city with the flying cars and all the cool future tech, and down below it's still very much that kind of grimy, poor looking Gotham City that we remember from the original animated series. And so I liked seeing a little bit more of that, of seeing that, I guess, the lower end of Gotham City. I thought that was really cool. Some of the background design and things in that were really good. I liked the arcade stuff as well. The fight scene. I like seeing Terry have to hold his own, not in the bat suit.
Yeah, that was good.
I liked the fight sequence between him and Donnie and some of Spellbinder's other sort of lackeys for the episode. I thought that was really a fun scene, and getting to see Terry have to not be able to rely just on his gadgets. And I also thought the scene where Terry as Batman is chasing Ronnie through the city, and Ronnie like jumps off a building and lands on an elevator and then falls down onto a truck, and the truck spins out of control and all that stuff, and watching Batman kind of sweep and fly through all low to the ground, having to avoid all the cars he's passing and stuff. I thought they had some pretty cool visual tricks in this episode.
Yeah, chase scenes are always good. That scene where he's chasing him, like you said, he jumps and he grabs onto an elevator, and then he falls, and Batman has to catch him. Then he's fighting Batman off, and he lands on a truck, and then the truck, he disconnects the tractor trailer part of an 18-wheeler, and Batman has to sort of pull a Spider-Man 2, I think. Before Spider-Man 2 came out, obviously.
Yeah.
But where he's placed in between two objects and has to kind of pull them together. That was pretty cool. Yeah, I think that actually, so we were speculating briefly before we came on the air. Another interesting visual is at the very end of the episode where it looks like Spellbinder is going to kill Batman, I guess. He has his head in his hand and he's using whatever device is in his hand. And he's, I guess, electrocuting Batman's head. I don't know. They don't really explain what he's doing. But all of a sudden, you see all these flashbacks through Terry's vision. And it's, stuff from the pilot and splicers. And, I didn't catch all the actual visual clues there. But I did notice specifically the splicers episode, some of the stuff from the pilot.
There's a little bit of Earth Mover in there.
Mm-hmm.
You see some of the Jokers. You see Blight. You see there's a couple shots of his dad in there, and I think a couple shots of Bruce as well, his other dad. And so there is. It looked like mostly just recycled clips. I'm not sure if there's anything original in there, but. It looked like mostly just kind of random recycled clips, or I guess what would have been his memories sort of flashing before his eyes.
Yeah, it was. I don't understand why. Like, I don't know if it was supposed to be his life was flashing before his eyes because he's dying, or if it was just if Spellbinder was reading his mind, or what it was. But we don't really get an answer, and as far as I know, it doesn't play into anything going forward. But it was still a pretty cool visual. So
definitely,
I gave a extra point for that. So I think overall it's visually and animation wise, it's a pretty strong episode. I gave it a 8 out of 10 for visuals and animation. What about you?
Yeah, I'm in the same ballpark. I went 7 out of 10. I think it's good. I don't think there's anything super spectacular. Certainly not coming off an episode we reviewed a couple weeks ago, like Bloodsport, which had such striking and interesting visuals and cool fight scenes. But this one still definitely had a lot of cool stuff in it.
There you go. All right, Liam, let's move on to music. And I made mental notes, which is interesting because usually Batman Beyond's music seems to all. No, nothing, not saying anything about the wonderful, it's good music. It's always good, but we've talked about it before that a lot of times it is meant to just blend into the background and add tone or, some subtlety to whatever you're watching and not really stand out. But there were two moments specifically that I felt the music stood out really well in this episode. The first one was during the fight scene between Terry and the VR users in the VR room, and there's this heavy it's backing guitar, like some rhythm guitar, but there's bass, and the bass is used to create the melody, which is always very interesting and stands out. And then the second they follow that scene up a couple scenes later, where as Batman I think he tells Bruce that he wants to punch Donnie in the face or beat the heck out of him or something like that, beat the answer out of somebody and out of somebody's face. And Bruce tells him he could just cool his jets and track him or something like that, or follow him. And so that scene though, he follows Donnie through sort of the rundown, beaten part of Gotham till he gets to this place wherever Spellbinder's hideout is, and he walks through these halls and he finds Donnie sort of almost overdosed or nearly comatose towards the end of not quite being able to make it back to Spellbinder all the way. And there's some really good backing music in that scene as well. But I thought music was really, really strong in this episode because of those.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. Those were definitely the two standouts. But as to your point, even though there's not necessarily always we've talked about that before, there's not always a traditional villain theme for someone like, say, the Spellbinder, but there is sort of they always, I think, generally with Batman Beyond especially, they're very good at conveying the music. Always has a tendency to add to whatever it is that they're doing. It generally adds really well, even if it's not a super standout musical theme that you're going to hum to yourself or something. It still does a really good job of adding to that atmosphere.
Yeah, we should add that the music for this episode was done by Christopher Carter, who's generally pretty strong when it comes to the music that he adds to these episodes. All right. Because of those two strong musical numbers, I felt that was enough to carry this episode to a 9 out of 10 for music. What about you?
Wow. Yeah, I'm a little lower than that. I went 7 out of 10, but still very, very good. I definitely enjoyed it quite a bit.
There you go. All right, Liam. Last but not least, let's talk about our voice actors. I know that we have several returning DCAU veterans in some minor roles here, and of course a couple of our main cast and normal players. Who do we have to talk about today?
Yeah, so in our sort of guest minor roles, we have, including just a couple, just one scene, practically cameos, I guess you could call them. You do in fact have Michael Rosenbaum showing up yet again in Batman Beyond, and I knew he did a bunch of like ancillary voices in this show, but I didn't realize like how frequently he popped up.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's in the I forget her name, the redheaded girl's fantasy, the one who kind of has the burnout, and Spellbinder tells the rest of the kids to just like dump her body somewhere.
Yeah.
But they have a pretty funny scene where he's like, I guess he's like a manager at a McDonald's, but I guess the idea is she's like young and thinks he's like, her manager is like the coolest guy and the most important guy, and so he's talking about like how he's getting promoted to being like regional supervisor or something. It's very silly, but it was like kind of this wacky little like 30-second non sequitur joke in this episode that I enjoyed. But yeah, always good to hear Michael Rosenbaum's voice. And also, of course, we had the returning John Cipher as Spellbinder, who he doesn't have a big role to play because he's just kind of there to tell the kids like, get in the machine, get out of the machine. He's not in it a lot because this episode tends to focus so much on Terry and Max, so he doesn't really have a lot to do. But I mean, he's good. I like they put some kind of a little effect on his voice.
Yeah,
where it kind of echoes a little bit that I think adds a lot to that to his delivery of what few lines he has that I do like. So that maybe goes more into sound design than voice acting, but wanted to mention that. And then we have Jason Marsden, aka Snapper Carr / Richie Foley / probably about 50 other voices. But we have him as Donnie, and he's a an old pro, so playing a sort of street tough punk kid who's dealing with stuff. I think he fit right in this role, and as you mentioned, his rock slam poetry is pretty ridiculously great. So thought he did a good job. But yeah, our main cast are kind of the ones who get to shine the brightest today. We have Cree Summer returning as Max. We have Will Friedle as Terry, of course, and Kevin Conroy as Bruce. I think the strength of it for me was probably, as it often can be, is the back and forth between Will and Kevin here. As Terry's kind of frustrating and kind of venting to Bruce about how could I let Max get in harm's way like this, and as we mentioned, Bruce is kind of giving him advice and telling him, this is what being Batman's all about, kid. And I thought their back and forth was really strong. Yeah,
there was some good. It's that pseudo coming of age type, but like he even mentions, oh, now you're talking like Batman. I think you mentioned that line before.
Yeah.
Now you sound like Batman. So yeah, there was some growth between the two of them, and then the best is when Bruce is like, Terry mentions to Bruce that Max is asking to get more involved. And first of all, Bruce no-sells it. Like, he's like, the girl? He doesn't even call her like Max. He's like, the girl? He goes, absolutely not. And Terry's like, yeah, I'm with you. Like, no. Like, so there's some good back and forth between them there. Yeah, I thought their interactions were really, really strong.
Yeah, Bruce sort of joking with him about like, oh, you're asking me for advice when it comes to women. I thought that was pretty funny as well. So
that was good. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think Cree Summer does a good job. Like we said, I think the script, the plot kind of lets the whole episode down. But I thought she and Will Friedle and their back and forth over when they're arguing with each other over her wanting to be more involved, and then later in the episode, once she's been in the machine and is trying to get back to it, I thought she does a good job. So, I gave voice acting a pretty strong 8 out of 10. Because I don't think anyone's like all-time great in this episode, but everyone in the episode is, I think, pretty darn good.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's pretty good. Also, I also gave it a 8 out of 10. Go figure. But yeah, I think there's some good acting all the way around. Question: Is this the last? This isn't the last Spellbinder episode, is it?
No, there's at least one more I know of, or that I can remember.
All right, so at least this isn't his final performance, because you're right. I like the voice effect thing that they put on him, and he comes across as certainly, man, like just what a creepy guy. Like, wasn't his motivation in the first episode? He felt like he didn't make enough money, and he listened to too many people's problems.
He was like the guidance counselor,
right? And now he's evolved into this guy who. Like his motivation is to use kids to get money, like to screw kids up to get like what does the reporter call him? The psychologist at the end or something like that. It's like, oh, they coined a cool nickname for him. That's how you know you've made it to Gotham villainy, when you have a cool nickname with alliteration, no doubt. Like,
absolutely.
Yeah. So 8 out of 10, which I guess, Liam, we will bring us to our final scores for this week's episode. Totaling everything up, I have a 29 out of 40. What about you?
Yeah, and maybe not surprisingly, I'm in the same ballpark here. I have a final score of 28 out of 40.
What do you know about that? All right. Well, again,
we talk about rewatchability here. It's tough because we don't hate this. I think we tried to make it clear we didn't hate this episode.
Yeah.
I definitely think there was a kind of a missed opportunity to not go a little deeper with some of the stuff about addiction and sort of, human contact and isolation, things like that. But again, sometimes that's just the constraints of a 22-minute children's cartoon. And, but all that being said, I doesn't feel like a must watch. Like we said, it does sort of plant some seeds for Max wanting to get more involved in the Batman side of Terry's life, beyond just sort of being the friend that helps him cover with his girlfriend. But that being said, I mean, this is obviously going to be followed up on in much greater detail later in the series. So I would say this is a skip. Like I said, it's not an avoid at all costs or anything, but I don't feel like this is one you gotta watch.
I concur. I would say the only reason I would recommend watching this is if you want more depth into your Max, fleshing out the Max character, or if you want to watch every Spellbinder episode. Otherwise, you can skip it.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
All right. Well, Liam, that will bring us to the end of this week's episode. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Before we go and start doing our normal wrap-up, Liam, why don't we talk about, I think you've already announced it on Twitter, but why don't you talk about, just in case people haven't followed us on Twitter yet, what are we covering for the month of February?
Yeah, starting next week and for the entire month, we are heading back to the OG, heading back to original Gotham City.
Nice.
And picking up where we left off with Batman the Animated Series. And we'll be kicking it off, like we said, picking up where we left off with the episode Cat Scratch Fever next week.
Oh boy, yeah, that means Moon of the Wolf isn't too far off.
Oh yeah.
Oh boy. All right. Well, that's going to be interesting. We got some interesting ones coming up here to deal with in the month of February, and then we have already discussed. We are not ready to quite reveal it just yet, but we've already discussed what we're going to do for March, and we're super excited about that. And then, we're super excited. Don't forget, follow Liam. You would have known already, if you didn't, that we were covering Batman the Animated Series. If you follow Liam at DCAU Review on Twitter, we love discussing fan theories and art and even the new controversial McFarlane DC multiverse figures, all of that. We've been discussing all that over on Twitter. So make sure you give Liam a follow. He does a great job of running our page there. You can also follow us on Instagram at DCAU Review. We post certainly some clips, upcoming clips from future episodes. We have our Throwback Thursday / Flashback Friday section on there where we'll post some older episodes, previews for more episodes, lots of other stuff on there as well. So give us a follow on there if you will. We would certainly appreciate that. And don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app. We feature on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and of course Spotify, but you can probably find us on your favorite podcast app if you use another one as well. Just search for DCAU Review. Go ahead, subscribe, like us, and if you can, leave us a review. That helps us out immensely. But yeah, I think that's about it, Liam.
Yeah, absolutely. I look forward to chatting with people about this episode, about what we're reviewing next month, and beyond. So stay tuned.
Pun intended there, and beyond.
Haha.
Got him. All right. Well, that will wrap us up for this week's episode. I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
And we will talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU Review.
Adios.